Donald Trump's administration is not merely struggling, it is coming apart in public because loyalty to Trump always ends the same way: humiliation, fear, and eventually an exit through the nearest door. People are quitting, insiders are panicking, and even members of his own White House operation are reportedly urging vulnerable Republican candidates to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Donald Trump before voters punish the entire party. That is the condition of this administration: a collapsing political machine led by a man who seems determined to wreck every institution he touches. And today's news makes that collapse even harder to hide. Another official from inside Trump's government is walking away and publicly explaining why. Frankly, more people should do exactly that. Trump has spent years trying to convince Americans that government is fundamentally useless, incompetent, and beyond repair. But government does not magically stop working on its own. It stops working when reckless, unqualified people seize control, attack experienced public servants, and deliberately sabotage the institutions they were elected to manage. That is why this resignation matters. That is why these internal revelations matter. And that is why the resistance to Trump's attempted takeover of the federal government matters. This story begins at the Department of Homeland Security, where a senior official has now headed for the exit. And considering what DHS has become under Trump, one of the most controversial and deeply distrusted agencies in the country, that departure tells us something much larger about the chaos, dysfunction, and moral decay consuming this administration from within.
So, surprise, here's a development in a story we have followed super closely over the course of the last year. As you know, the Trump administration had this plan to build all these gigantic Trump prison camps all over the country. They spent over $1 billion on these huge warehouses, buying up huge warehouse facilities all over the country, and they were going to use them to lock up tens of thousands of people. Huge Trump prison camps. Some of them would have been among the biggest prisons in the world, all to hold people without trial. After ferocious resistance to these facilities from basically every town all across the country where they wanted to put one, we got reporting last month that the Trump administration has now abandoned this idea. They are pulling back from almost all of them. They bought 11 of these warehouse facilities, and the reporting, first in the New York Times, was that at least 7 of the 11 warehouses they bought, they're now planning to either resell them or repurpose them for some other government use, but they're not going to make them into these gigantic Trump prison camps after all. So of the 11 they bought, 7 of them to be resold or repurposed. But then what about the other 4, right? That would leave 4 of these prison camps that they're still apparently going forward with. Well, one of those we have an update on. One of those was a facility in Surprise, Arizona. That is the name of the place, Surprise. And there, like many of these places where these things were going to be sited, we have seen ardent and intense and dedicated local pushback. Early on, more than 1,000 people showing up to a Surprise, Arizona City Council meeting to say, no, they do not want this. The pushback has gone so far as a dramatic proposal from local residents in Surprise that their city government should be dissolved altogether. Because if their local government can't be counted on to fight hard enough against this Trump prison camp, these activists in the town, people who live in the town, are proposing that they should disincorporate Surprise, Arizona to get those local leaders out of the way, because maybe the county where they are, Maricopa County in Arizona, will help them fight. That said, the Democratic-run state government in Arizona has been an ally to those locals in Surprise, helping them push back. Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays filed a lawsuit to stop the Trump administration from building this thing. Arizona's 2 U.S. Democratic senators are very much trying to associate themselves with the fight against the prison, which is a sure sign that the people fighting against the prison are on the right side and they're going to win. Here's Senator Ruben Gallego with some of the young people, some of the high school kids who've been fighting against this thing, their school would be just blocks away from this huge prison camp. Just today, we got a statement from Senator Mark Kelly's office congratulating the people of Surprise, Arizona, particularly the young people in Surprise, Arizona, for how hard they've been fighting against this prison camp, commending their work to stop this thing.
So no, it should not surprise anyone that CE, and DHS have become deeply unpopular symbols of Trump's agenda. Across the country, communities are standing up and saying, absolutely not. You are not turning our neighborhoods into surveillance zones, detention corridors, and testing grounds for authoritarian government. And honestly, it is encouraging to watch ordinary people push back, residents flooding city council meetings, students organizing, families refusing to stay silent, and local leaders being forced to choose between their constituents and Donald Trump's machinery of fear. Democrats should pay very close attention to that response. Too many elected Democrats still seem to believe that the moderate position is meeting Republicans halfway on mass surveillance, aggressive immigration raids, and the expansion of federal police power. But there is nothing moderate about compromising away people's privacy and civil liberties. Americans do not want Palantir-powered patrols moving through their communities. They do not want their messages monitored, their movements tracked, or their personal information fed into giant government databases. They do not want masked agents operating without meaningful accountability. Treating those policies as normal is not centrism. It is surrendering to an agenda that is radical, intrusive, and increasingly unpopular. And now even people inside DHS are walking away and telling the public exactly what they witnessed. A senior department official did not quietly slip out the back door with a vague statement about spending more time with family. He left with a blistering message about the Trump administration and made it clear that he was relieved to no longer serve as one of the gears keeping this machine running. Mark Rosenblum, the executive director of the Office of Homeland Security Statistics, announced that he was leaving after roughly a decade at the department, and his departure matters because this was not some political appointee who arrived yesterday looking for television appearances. Rosenblum was a career public servant whose job centered on data, statistical integrity, and evidence-based policy. He helped build the office from a small, under-resourced team struggling to complete basic annual reports into a larger, modern operation capable of producing monthly updates, daily and weekly internal analysis, and department-wide statistical standards. Under his leadership, the office expanded beyond immigration reporting to cover data across DHS. It improved its analytic capacity, modernized its technology systems, rebuilt its website, moved information infrastructure to the cloud, and created processes designed to make the department's statistics more reliable and useful. In other words, this was exactly the kind of government work that most people never see but depend on: professional, technical, unglamorous work intended to help public institutions make better decisions with taxpayer money. Rosenblum said he was proud of what his team built and deeply saddened to leave the career employees who continued producing quality work under increasingly hostile conditions. He described his colleagues as intelligent, mission-driven experts who remained committed to public service even while the political environment around them became more difficult. But he was equally clear about why he was relieved to leave the current administration. He pointed to what he described as a war against immigrants, a war against federal workers, and a war against facts. He also referenced the Iran war and what he called brazen corruption. And he said his next role would allow him to keep working on immigration policy and data in an environment that better reflected his values. That is not a casual criticism. That is a senior statistics official saying the administration responsible for using government data has become hostile to facts themselves. Naturally, DHS responded with the usual dismissive statement. People are entitled to their opinions, but that does not make those opinions accurate. Fine. But when the person making the accusation spent years running the department's statistical office, maybe the administration should do more than wave him away as merely having an opinion. When the data professional says the government is waging war on facts, that deserves more attention than a generic public relations denial from the very institution he just left. And this is the larger story. Donald Trump returned to power alongside figures such as Elon Musk and Russ Vought, with a familiar right-wing objective: convince Americans that government is inherently incompetent, corrupt, and unnecessary. Then they attack the people who keep it functioning, gut the offices that produce reliable information, create dysfunction, and point to the resulting chaos as proof that government never worked. It is political sabotage disguised as reform. Career civil servants are not some secret cabal hiding in Washington and collecting enormous checks for doing nothing. Most are people who could earn more elsewhere but remain because they believe public institutions should work. They inspect systems, process benefits, maintain records, analyze threats, track spending, enforce standards, and try to ensure that tax dollars are not wasted. People like Mark Rosenblum spend years building institutional knowledge that cannot simply be replaced by another Trump loyalist with a social media account and a political grudge. The fact that career civil servant has been turned into an insult tells you how distorted Trump's political culture has become. Expertise itself is treated as suspicious. Education is framed as elitism. Data becomes propaganda whenever it contradicts the leader. Anyone who understands how an agency actually operates is portrayed as part of a conspiracy, while people with no relevant experience are promoted as courageous outsiders merely because they flatter Trump. That is anti-intellectualism in its purest political form. Leaders with weak ideas cannot win an honest argument against experts, so they convince their followers that expertise is the enemy. Trump, Musk, Vance, and their allies constantly perform intelligence rather than demonstrate it. They market themselves as fearless geniuses while pushing policies that collapse under scrutiny. They are not serious thinkers confronting a broken system. They are political salesmen blaming the employees while looting the store. And that is why Rosenblum's resignation matters. It is not simply one man changing jobs. It is another warning from inside the government that the Trump administration is driving out experienced people, attacking objective information, and replacing public service with loyalty and propaganda. When the professionals responsible for producing the facts say the government has declared war on facts, the rest of us should listen.
Donald never actually made any money in his life. He inherited a lot of money, lost a lot of money, and then has since figured out how to leverage the power of the presidency to grift. He has more money now than he has ever had before in his life. He was never a billionaire until now. And that should raise red flags for everybody because, one, nobody should use the presidency, the power of the presidency, to enrich themselves. They should be paying their full attention to the work of being president of the United States. Secondly, by making money in the ways he and his useless children have, he continues to put this country's national security at risk, which means he's putting all of us at risk, because when you have a president of the United States who has basically put out a sign saying, "I'm for sale," only
Donald Trump is a scammer and a liar. That is what he will always be. That is the only thing that he will always be, is a scammer and a liar who is trying to tell you that government is broken while he breaks it himself. The big problem with the corruption in government isn't civil servants who want to do a good job. It is the fact that Donald Trump has profited massively off the presidency, and the corruption is rampant, as Senator John Ossoff always calls out.
This morning, Berean, I'd like to share with you some brief words on the subject of misrule as we endure the daily spectacle of this broken man and his ruined presidency. Each day, his allies are fewer, and even they no longer deny his corruption. The obscene self-dealing while he plunges the nation deeper into reckless war, while the people pay more for everything, and millions lose health coverage, while he rakes in billions and builds himself a ballroom and prepares again to attack our elections. And Berean, let's be clear, just one man attempted election fraud in Georgia in 2020, Donald J. Trump, when he called Brad Raffensperger to demand he, quote, find precisely the number of votes he needed to win in a state he'd lost. Do you remember that phone call, Berean? But Brad Raffensperger refused. He and enough men and women of integrity told the president that the law forbade him to overturn the rule of the people. And the failure of that scheme to seize the presidency has enraged him ever since. Now, nearly 6 years on, returned to power, but more reviled than ever. He reanimates his 2020 obsession while he spirals in fear of the rebuke to come this fall and the accountability that will follow it. Because accountability is coming, Berean. So with each passing day, we see him dig the moral pit deeper and deeper. But Pastor, Proverbs says, whoever digs a pit will fall into it.